Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're taking a deep dive into a pretty fascinating document. It's called the National Cyber Threat Assessment 2025 to 2026.
Yeah, it's put out by the Canadian Center for Cybersecurity, and it's pretty important because this is the intel that the government uses to figure out how to deal with all the bad guys in the cyber world.
Well, this is great timing because, increasingly public servants are interacting with Canadians in the digital space. So
Yeah.
this is critical information. So maybe you can just give us a sense of, what's the overall takeaway? What are the key things that we should be thinking about as we navigate this world?
Sure. I think the biggest takeaway is that the threat landscape is constantly evolving.
Yeah.
It's getting more complex, and it's not just about protecting our systems, it's about protecting Canadians and ensuring that we can continue to provide essential services in a safe and secure manner.
Okay. So things are getting more complex. We're also seeing a growing boldness from some of the actors out there. I mean, we've seen some pretty disturbing events play out on the world stage recently. Things that maybe a few years ago we would have thought unthinkable.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. One of the things that this report highlights is the fact that China has been strategically pre-positioning itself within U.S. critical infrastructure,
Hmm.
which is kind of scary when you think about it, because if there were to be a conflict between China and the U.S., the potential for disruption is huge.
A lot.
And we need to be aware of that here in Canada because we're so closely tied to the U.S. economy.
Yeah, and we can't forget about Russia. I mean, their playbook is pretty clear. Their attack on Kyivstar, the Ukrainian telecom company,
Right.
that with a stark reminder that they're not afraid to use cyber attacks to disrupt and destabilize and to target civilian infrastructure.
Absolutely. And it's not just about military targets anymore. It's about civilian critical infrastructure becoming a new battleground in cyberspace.
Okay, so the report lays out kind of the top three threats that we need to be aware of, and that's China, Russia, and Iran. So maybe we can go through each one of those and just talk a bit about what makes each of them unique.
That's good.
So let's start with China.
Okay. So, the People's Republic of China has a very sophisticated and active cyber program. And they're not shy about using it. Their objectives are really threefold.
Hmm.
They're interested in espionage, stealing intellectual property, and something called transnational repression,
Oh, wow.
which basically means that they're targeting individuals outside of their borders who criticize the government.
So that's a little unsettling when you think about it,
Yeah.
because it means that they're not just focused on, traditional targets like military or government institutions.
Right.
They're going after individuals. And the report mentions that over 20 Canadian government networks have been compromised by Chinese cyber actors in the last 4 years.
Yeah, and even more concerning is the fact that they've targeted Canadian politicians who have been critical of the Chinese Communist Party.
Okay, so it's clear that this is a serious threat and one that we need to be taking very seriously.
Sure.
And I think it's interesting because the report also highlights the fact that provincial and territorial governments are particularly valuable targets for China
Right.
because they hold a lot of power when it comes to resources and trade, which are areas of key interest for China.
Makes sense.
So it's not just a federal issue, it's something that all levels of government need to be aware of. All right, so let's move on to Russia. I mean, they're all about disruption and destabilization.
Yeah. They're really good at targeting critical infrastructure and spreading disinformation to undermine trust and sow chaos. The SolarWinds attack a few years ago was a really good example of how Russia uses supply chain compromises to conduct espionage.
Oh.
So we need to be very vigilant about the security of not just our own systems, but also the software and services that we rely on. And then we can't forget about the pro-Russia non-state actors. These are the groups that are actively trying to influence our foreign policy. They're trying to disrupt critical infrastructure, and they're doing it with a multi-pronged approach.
Okay, so lots to think about there. Let's move on to Iran. They seem to be focused more on using cyber operations to kind of coerce, harass, and repress their opponents, both domestically and internationally.
Right, that's their main focus. But what's really concerning is that they're showing an increasing willingness to conduct disruptive attacks outside of the Middle East. So they're expanding their reach and their tactics are getting more sophisticated.
Yeah, the report actually mentions that they've been using really sophisticated social engineering techniques. They've even been leveraging events like the Flight 752 tragedy
Wow.
to lure unsuspecting victims. So that's a pretty chilling reminder that these threats can exploit real-world events and emotions for malicious purposes. So I think for us as public servants, it's a reminder that we need to be aware of these tactics so we can help protect Canadians from falling victim to them.
Absolutely. And all of this just scratches the surface of the cybercrime landscape.
Right.
This report also digs into how cybercrime is impacting everyday Canadians in a big way. It's a whole other world operating in the shadows. It can be pretty alarming when you start to see the level of organization and sophistication these criminals have.
So how are they able to get away with so much? It seems like every day there's a new headline about a major data breach or some kind of online scam.
Well, a big part of it is something called cybercrime as a service.
Cybercrime as a service. That sounds kind of
Oh,
Orwellian.
no, right? It's basically an online marketplace
Mm.
where criminals can buy and sell all the tools they need. Hacking tools, stolen data, even expertise.
So you're telling me that anyone with a bit of tech savvy and some bad intentions can basically become a cyber criminal?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
It's like Amazon for criminals, but instead of buying, books and clothes, they're buying stolen credit card numbers or ransomware kits. There was a platform called Genesis Market that was taken down recently,
Yeah.
but it was a great example of this. They were selling stolen credentials, like usernames and passwords, giving criminals access to people's online lives.
That is terrifying.
Hmm.
And with so much of our lives happening online these days, banking, shopping, even accessing government services, it's pretty scary to think about how vulnerable we all are.
Yeah, and the financial losses from fraud in Canada are just staggering. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars lost each year.
And it's not just the financial losses, it's the emotional toll it takes on victims. The loss of trust, the sense of violation.
Exactly. And these scams are getting so sophisticated. Remember those old Nigerian prince emails?
Oh yeah, those are classic.
Those are practically ancient history now. These days, criminals are using AI to personalize phishing attacks, making them much harder to spot.
Oh wow.
And they can even create deepfakes, which are basically videos that look and sound real but are completely fabricated.
So they could potentially impersonate government officials or spread misinformation that's incredibly difficult to debunk.
Exactly. And that makes it even harder for citizens to know who to trust and what information to believe.
And, the report also talks about ransomware. It seems like it's everywhere these days.
Yeah, ransomware is nasty because it essentially holds your data hostage. They encrypt your files and demand payment to unlock them. And it's not just individuals being targeted, it's businesses, organizations, even critical infrastructure.
We've seen that firsthand here in Canada, right, with the attacks on Suncor Energy, Sick Kids Hospital, and the city of Hamilton.
Exactly. These attacks can disrupt essential services, cause major financial losses, and put people's safety at risk. And these criminals are constantly evolving their tactics. They're using advanced techniques to evade detection, making it even harder to recover data.
It's like they're always one step ahead.
And they're getting more brazen, too. We're seeing more cases of big game hunting, where they specifically target large organizations and critical infrastructure providers because they know these entities are more likely to pay big ransoms to avoid disruption.
So it's not just about having the right technical defenses in place. It's also about understanding the motivations and tactics of these criminals so we can anticipate their next move.
Right. And we need to be mindful of how these attacks erode public trust. If citizens feel like their data and privacy aren't being protected, they're going to lose confidence in government institutions.
It all feels very overwhelming. It's like we're facing this constant barrage of threats. Are there any bright spots? Is there anything working in our favor?
Well, the good news is that awareness is increasing. Governments and organizations are investing more in cybersecurity, and there's a lot of great work being done to strengthen our defenses. But we can't become complacent.
So it's not just about reacting to incidents as they happen. It's about building a culture of cybersecurity awareness and resilience across all levels of government and society as a whole.
Absolutely. And another major challenge we face is our reliance on just a handful of dominant tech companies. We're putting so much trust and our data in these companies, which makes them huge targets.
It's like putting all our eggs in one basket, right? If one of those companies gets hit, it can have a domino effect across entire sectors.
Think about the attacks on Microsoft and Change Healthcare. Those were huge wake-up calls. They showed us how interconnected everything is, how one vulnerability can lead to widespread disruption.
So we need to think more strategically about cybersecurity, especially as we move more towards cloud-based services and rely on more third-party providers.
Exactly. And here's another thing that's starting to worry people. The use of dual-use technology in cyberspace.
Dual use. I don't think I'm familiar with that. What does that mean?
So basically, it's technology that can be used for both civilian and military purposes.
Ah, I see. So like satellites.
Exactly. Satellites are used for everything from TV to internet access, but also military communications and intelligence.
So the worry is that if there's a cyber attack on a military asset, it could impact regular people too.
Right, it's getting harder to separate civilian and military targets online, which makes protecting things like infrastructure and essential services even more difficult. And as this tech gets fancier and more interconnected, well, the potential for things to go wrong just keeps growing.
Wow, that's a lot to digest. What does all this mean for public servants? How can we use this knowledge to better serve and protect Canadians in this crazy digital world?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? I think the report offers some really good advice for public servants.
Okay, well, let's hear it. What can we do to up our game in this whole cyber world?
Well, the first thing is awareness. We got to keep learning about the threats and how they could impact the people we serve. It's not just about protecting our systems, it's about giving Canadians the knowledge and tools to protect themselves, too.
So thinking about how these threats could disrupt the services we provide.
Exactly. Could a ransomware attack shut down service delivery in your department? Could a data breach expose sensitive information? We need to be thinking ahead, spotting those vulnerabilities, and taking steps to fix them before something happens.
And cybersecurity isn't just an IT problem anymore, is it? It's got to be something we're all aware of and take responsibility for.
I agree. We need to move past just reacting to incidents and make security the top priority. Strong passwords, keeping software updated, watching out for those sneaky phishing emails, that kind of stuff.
And we can't forget about the human element. People make mistakes.
Absolutely. We need to educate ourselves and our colleagues. Even small things like thinking twice before clicking a link or being careful about what we share online can make a big difference.
Okay, so awareness and prevention are key.
Mm.
But what if something does happen? What's our role in responding to a cyber incident?
That's where working together is so important. We can't tackle this alone. We need to break down those silos and collaborate across government, with industry, even with international partners.
Sharing information, learning from each other, coordinating our efforts.
Yeah,
That's how we build a stronger, more resilient cyber ecosystem in Canada.
exactly.
Wow, this has been a really eye-opening deep dive. We've gone from looking at the global cyber threat landscape to seeing the very real impact these threats have right here in Canada. And I think it's clear cybersecurity isn't just an IT issue anymore. It's something that affects all of us, both personally and professionally.
And as public servants, we're right at the heart of it. We've got this crucial role to play in protecting our digital infrastructure and making sure Canadians are safe and secure in this increasingly digital world.
Absolutely. So as we wrap things up, I have a question for everyone listening. Given this ever-changing cyber threat landscape, how can we as public servants adapt what we do and the services we provide to best protect Canadians and keep their trust in government institutions? It's a lot to think about.
It really is. I'd encourage everyone to read the full report and check out the Cyber Center's website for more info. Knowledge is power, and staying informed is the best way to defend ourselves against these threats.
Great advice. The cyber world's always changing, but if we're vigilant, proactive, and work together, we can handle these challenges and help create a safe and prosperous digital future for all Canadians. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.